What point did you realise that you were not going to be, or you as in Stampede as a whole would realise that you just weren't going to be able to hang on to the Bulldogs very much longer because there were just more and more offers coming in from Japan and eventually the WWF?
Yeah, I think the point where the rivalry started with the WWF and Vince McMahon's global launch, basically, where he ran opposition to all the territories. This would have been in 1984. That's when we realized that we wouldn't be able to keep Dynamite and Davey. A few things, I guess, fell into place for that as well, but they were now doing about 3-4 tours a year in Japan. And so, and they couldn't turn down the money and the exposure there, and it was opening a lot of doors for Dynamite initially, and then Davey came after. And then when they both were booked as opponents in this junior heavyweight tournament they had in 1984, just had incredible matches against each other and as a tag team. But by this time, their names were getting out there. There was a lot of interest in them from other promoters, and we knew it would be just a matter of time before they either signed with WWF, which had begun its expansion, or possibly NWA or AWA. There was a lot of interest in Dynamite and Davey with those promotions, but as Steve wrote in the book, it didn't go so well at first when Vince McMahon bought out the Stampede promotion from my dad in '84. That basically meant the end of Stampede. And so Dynamite and Davey had a lot of opportunities. They could just work full time in Japan. And I think they were inclined to do that. But they were getting a lot of offers, though, from the WWF. And they initially worked for WWF. They did some house shows and some TV tapings in the fall of '84. Neither one was very happy. I think it was a bit of a transition period for WWF. And when Vince bought out the promotion from my dad, he was committed to using Dynamite and Davey and Brett and Jim Neidhart. He said, "I'll take on those 4 stars and repackage them, relaunch them, as favorites in Western Canada because they were well established there." And so they started working for him in the fall of '84, and Dynamite especially was very unimpressed. He was very unhappy with their payoffs from the TV tapings that they were doing and just the format of matches. And he was working against a few American guys that didn't really get him over as well, or Davey. And they weren't happy at all. They said, screw WWF. We can just tour Japan. And, I think we're open to offers maybe, but, from AWA and NWA at that time, but neither of them seemed committed to using the Bulldogs as their top stars. And maybe it was because they were still smaller. Some of them didn't have established junior heavyweight divisions. And it was, even though they could have done some tremendous business in NWA or AWA, there wasn't, I think, a commitment enough from them to utilize Dynamite and Davey and put them over well. They probably would have just wanted to steal them away from WWF, because that's a lot of that was going on where Vince was trying to sign guys from the other promotions, and they were trying to sign some of Vince's guys, but Vince seemed to be winning that war. I think from the success of his WrestleMania 1 and Hulkamania getting over, he was definitely winning the promotional war, and he was outdrawing AWA and NWA and and all the smaller promotions kind of fell by the wayside because obviously you couldn't compete with the bigger promotions, and you're losing your talent to them. But so initially Dynamite and Davey were so turned off from WWF, and they vowed not to go back there. They just said, we'll just work for Japan. And then what had happened is they switched over from New Japan to All Japan, and that was a big thing over there because not only did they switch offices, but they did it right at the beginning of the tour. They were booked to wrestle for New Japan's tag team tourney in 1984, and then they had signed a secret closed door meeting, or signed a secret agreement in a meeting with Baba, and they switched over and wrestled for All Japan instead. And that, there was huge news because they were big stars in New Japan. All of a sudden, just before a tour started, they switched over and wrestled for All Japan instead. So I think this was a pretty good indication that Dynamite and Davey were independent contractors, and they could do whatever they wanted. They could work for whoever they wanted, and they weren't bound by any loyalties or long-standing agreements. And when they did that, they commanded basically who they were going to work for. But Vince knew he had lost two really great commodities, and I think he had felt bad that they initially weren't happy at their treatment and how they were used. And so he, and then when this happened, when he switched over from New Japan to All Japan, and Vince at that time had a partnership with New Japan. He was booking talent for them. And now that Dynamite Davey had left New Japan and gone to the rival All Japan office, he was convinced he had lost them for sure. And Vince went over to Japan and tried to meet with Dynamite Davey and try to talk them out of that. Said, you can't leave New Japan like this. They'll offer you more money, and he wasn't allowed to see them. They didn't give Vince any access to where Dynamite Davey were staying, and I don't think it would have swayed them anyway. They had already made the decision to switch promotions there, but then he was in constant contact with my dad. And, he said, I really want to sign Dynamite Davey to WWF, and we'll make things right the next time we can bring them in. And I think it was a lot of my dad's influence that persuaded them to revisit WWF, because by 1985, it was pretty clear they were outlasting AWA and NWA. They were signing the better talent. They had the TV ratings. They had the exposure. WrestleMania 1 was a huge success. And Vince was winning the promotional war. And my dad had talks with Dynamite and Davey and said, I think this is your best offer. Initially, it didn't go well. But, it turns out the demand has now really increased for you to go there. And I think he's going to make you an offer you can't refuse, And Dynamite, especially, who really negotiated for him and Davey, and he was the spokesperson and leader of the team, was pretty opposed to it. And he was just happy to say, fuck everybody in North America. We'll just do tours of Japan. But Vince flew them down, had a meeting with them, and Vince basically promised them the world. So I'll put the tag team belts on you. I'll pay you this much money, and it was such a good offer they couldn't refuse. But James, with the key thing that allowed the deal to work was that they would be allowed to tour All Japan while they wrestled for WWF, and that was pretty unprecedented. So Dynamite said we're happy with our tours of Japan. We want to basically continue making 3 tours a year there. So if you want us that badly, you have to let us tour Japan there. And Tom wasn't willing to give that up. And so Vince reluctantly said, okay, I'll allow you to do your 3 tours, and we'll work around that schedule. And I've never ever heard of any arrangement like that where a wrestler could negotiate that, and have that freedom to work for another promotion, especially since it was with a rival office to New Japan that WWF had an agreement with, although, that kind of dissipated a year or so later, because WWF was charging, such a huge fee to New Japan to book talent for them. But Vince basically made that concession, and but I think it was a lot of my dad's influence on them. Say, take the offer, get that exposure, make the money. It'd be a good career move with them. And I think another influence on Dynamite and Davey was that Brett and Jim were in the WWF, and they needed opponents to work with and get over. And when they signed Dynamite and Davey, they came up with this idea of turning Brett heel, pairing him up with Jim, making him the Hart Foundation, and then they had this natural rivalry with the Bulldogs, and and it was great. It drew huge money there and really catapulted the tag team division there.
Is the story true that when the agreement was reached between Vince and the Bulldogs, that Vince got up on a table and did a little dance?
Absolutely, he did. Dynamite told me that directly. Vince was so excited. It was almost an orgasm for him. He was so excited that he signed the Bulldogs, and he jumped up on the table and did this little dance, and he was like a little kid in heaven. He was so ecstatic that he was able to sign the Bulldogs. I think because he had nearly lost them, and it seemed like that he would never be able to sign them, and he was so convinced that he had to have them. I need this for my tag team division, and maybe he saw the long-term drawing power that they had, especially maybe as a new British invasion or something. He knew how well they were over in Japan, what they had done for the Stampede promotion as well. And, they were probably the two most sought after guys in the whole industry, and Vince was able to sign them. It was a huge coup for them. And I don't think it would have happened at that point or as soon as it did if my dad hadn't influenced Dynamite and Davey, to as kind of as a fatherly figure, and a statesperson. This is going to be the best career move for you. Sign with WWF, get that exposure, make the money, and they obviously have big plans for you, and so they reluctantly signed there, and obviously the money was just too good for them to turn down, and and when they were still allowed to make their tours of all Japan, they had the best of both worlds, and I think they did that for about a year or so, and then when Vince was committed to really putting the tag team belts on them, and said WrestleMania 2, we're going to put the belts on you, they reluctantly gave up their deals with All Japan just because the money was just too good to turn down with WWF, and it was just too hard to travel back and forth and do the tours with both. But they definitely went there on their terms, and when Vince basically made those concessions, they didn't turn it down.